the Starfleet Life with the USS Dauntless. Are you brave enough to be a Starfleet officer? Do you have what it takes?
Greetings. I'm Admiral Swart. Oh, wait, I'm still wearing my headset. I shouldn't be doing that. That's better. Okay, good. All right. Let's hope that didn't kill my audio anywhere. All right, that's a little better. All right, I'm Admiral Swart, Commanding Officer of the USS Dauntless, and this is the briefing with the Admiral for stardate -250282.1. I am the Admiral in question, and today we're going to be talking about courage. But before we do that, let's do the regular stuff. Apparently YouTube is not happening. Okay, that's fine. We'll upload to YouTube later. We record these sessions every Tuesday at 12:30 South African Standard Time. If you're an active duty member of the Dauntless crew, you can join us live in Discord to participate in the chat. You can ask me questions and log mission attendance. Everyone else is welcome to watch the live stream on YouTube, assuming it works, which today it doesn't appear to be doing. Or if you're not available at that time, you can watch it back later, either on YouTube or on Facebook. If you have a question or a comment, please remember to @tag me in the chat. So that is here in the screening room channel on the Dauntless Discord. Just @tag me so that when I get to the Q&A section at the end, I can scroll back and easily find the comments that are addressed to me and not just a regular conversation that's happening during the course of the mission. I'll do my best to address your comment or question then and there. And if I can't do that, then we can maybe make it a future video topic. Also, if you are watching this after the fact, you're welcome to drop a comment wherever you find the video, YouTube, Facebook. You can send me a message privately or openly on the channel or wherever you like. You can get that message to me and I'll do my best to respond to you. Who are we? Well, the USS Dauntless is a future-focused action and advocacy group that is at its core a Star Trek fan club. The Dauntless is a chapter of Starfleet International, the largest Star Trek fan association in the world. Starfleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association, Incorporated, or Starfleet International, or SFI. SFI uses the metaphor of a starship to organize its chapters, of which the USS Dauntless is one. It's not an actual starship. Instead, it's a community of like-minded people who promote Star Trek both as a form of entertainment and as a vision for the future, while taking action towards that future. The ship isn't a ship at all. The ship is the crew. Dauntless's mission is to promote values and philosophy of Star Trek, to provide a space for fans to connect and engage in activities to promote those values. The Dauntless is based in Cape Town, South Africa, but we have crew members in cities around the world. In today's briefing, we're going to be talking about one of the core values of a Starfleet officer, courage. Now, what is courage? Well, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the mastery of fear. It's not the silencing of anxious thoughts or feelings, but the acknowledgement of them and the decision to forge ahead regardless. If you've been watching my briefings recently, you'll be picking up some terms that I've been throwing around in recent topics, especially in the episode we did recently on Vulcan logic and Stoic philosophy. So when we're talking about having anxious thoughts or feelings and being aware of them, acknowledging them, that is the practice of Stoicism. So courage is, in a very real sense, a physical inaction of Stoic philosophy. So it's not about not having fear. It's not about not being afraid. It's about being aware of your fear and deciding to take action despite that fear. It's the warrior's acceptance of the battle's uncertainty, the sailor's embrace of the storm's fury, the explorer's confrontation with the unknown. Courage is not the eradication of doubt, but the determination to act in the face of it. It's the unwavering resolve to move forward even when the path is shrouded in darkness and the destination is uncertain. So yes, it's being aware of the fact that something frightening is happening. And when I talk about fear, I don't just mean phobias. I don't just mean abject fear or mortal fear or anything like that. I'm talking about all kinds of fear, including sort of generalized anxiety or just a feeling of uncertainty or discomfort. Being able to act in the face of that, and despite of those things, being aware of them and setting them aside and acting anyway, that is what courage is. That is what a Starfleet officer is expected to embody. For the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to broadly categorize courage into three main types. There's physical courage, moral courage, and psychological courage. And each requires a distinct form of bravery, and it manifests in different situations. Really, these are all part of the same concept. Just like when it comes to mission readiness, we can slice and dice it as much as we like. It's all part of the same thing. But from a practical point of view, it may be helpful to think about this in three different ways. And again, it's my rule of threes. I like to break things down into threes. Let's look at the first one, physical courage. And this is the most commonly recognized form of courage. So if you're watching somebody doing thing online and you think, oh, that was a brave thing they did, this is typically what that is, right? If somebody's doing something brave on a YouTube video. And it involves overcoming fear and taking action despite the risk of physical harm or death. Examples include soldiers fighting in battle, firefighters rescuing people from burning buildings, police officers confronting dangerous criminals. Physical courage requires a strong will and physical fitness, and often requires specialized training. This is not, to be clear, the version of courage that we in Starfleet espouse necessarily. We don't want to encourage Starfleet members to put themselves in physical harm. Although it's very impressive when somebody does so, that's not something we want to promote. We don't want anybody putting themselves in danger. Unless, of course, you are called to do so by your own set of motivations. If you feel like you should be a firefighter, then be a firefighter. Please do. If you feel called to be a volunteer police person or professional police person for that matter, then you should follow that calling. Make sure that you get the specialized training that you need to make sure that that vocation or that occupation is safe, and take whatever steps you can to make sure that you are not in physical danger. And that's really what that specialized training is about. It's about mitigating the danger for yourself. One could argue that being a wrangler of large predators could be a dangerous occupation, which is something that I spend some of my time doing. I would counter that argument by saying that the specialized training that I've received in doing that work has made it perfectly safe for me to do so. And if I find myself in a situation where I am facing physical danger, it's because I've made bad choices and I haven't employed my training correctly. And I would imagine that something similar happens when you are something like a firefighter or a policeman, or perhaps not a soldier. A soldier is a different kind of occupation where you are willingly putting yourself in danger, putting your body on the line, knowing that danger is part of the job. So again, if you feel called to engage in any of those occupations, then you should follow your calling. But within the context of Starfleet missions, we are not asking anybody or encouraging anybody to put themselves in any kind of physical danger. That's not what we want. That's not what we call for, and that's not what we encourage. Then there's moral courage. So this is the type of courage that involves standing up for one's beliefs and doing what you think is right, even when it's unpopular or it carries social consequences. It requires resisting peer pressure. It requires speaking out against injustice and often challenging authority, either individual authority like government or teachers or employers, or the authority of the people around you, the crowd. Examples include things like whistleblowers exposing corruption, activists fighting for civil rights, individuals standing up to bullies. Moral courage requires strong convictions, integrity, and a willingness to face social disapproval or isolation. This also is not really the kind of courage that Starfleet is looking for from Starfleet officers. I mean, we would hope that no whistleblowing is needed within the context of Starfleet, of the Dauntless or Starfleet International. Although I suppose no institution wants to be the kind of organization where whistleblowing might become necessary. And one would also hope that if something dodgy was happening at the heart of Starfleet, people involved would want to raise the alarm about that. Not that, to my knowledge, anything like that has happened really. We've, of course, Starfleet International has had its issues in the past with people acting not in good faith, and we've dealt with those situations as best we can and put them behind us. But ideally, we wouldn't want to see that kind of thing happen in future. But it is a thing that happens that if your deeply held moral beliefs are in conflict with the people around you or the people above you, it requires a certain degree of moral courage to be able to say the thing that you think is right, despite the fact that the people around you will disagree with you and may judge you for it and may socially condemn you for it. The phrase I'm trying very hard not to say here is cancel culture. I won't elaborate further on that, but I think by simply saying that, you know what I mean. Moral courage is that kind of courage, the courage that it takes to stand up to that kind of social machine and do what you think is right despite it. The next kind is psychological courage. And this is the form of courage that involves facing one's inner fears and anxieties. It requires confronting emotional pain, overcoming self-doubt, and taking risks to achieve personal growth. So things like that this would include would be things like seeking therapy to address a trauma that you haven't been able to resolve on your own, overcoming addiction, leaving an abusive relationship, that kind of thing. Psychological courage requires self-awareness, resilience, and a commitment to personal well-being. This is the kind of courage that we strongly espouse within Starfleet, from the Starfleet officers. This is the courage, psychological courage that motivates you, pushes you, drives you to overcome your personal barriers, your emotional and cognitive barriers, and become a better person, become a better Starfleet officer, to engage in the philosophy of mission readiness, to go to the gym, to eat right, to donate blood, to participate, to volunteer, to stand up and do the things that a good Starfleet officer does, despite the emotional or even physical discomfort that might arise. But it's important to know that courage is not something that's innate. It's not built into all of us. It's something that we're all capable of, but it doesn't come with the standard model of the human body or the human brain. It's a skill. It's cultivated through deliberate practice and experience. It's not an inherent trait that individuals are born with. It's a quality that's developed and strengthened through conscious effort, repeated practice, and accumulated experience. Of course, some people are naturally more courageous than others. That's, as with everything, everyone is a little bit more or a little bit less. But even if you're somebody who lacks courage, if you feel that you are not somebody who is a very courageous person, the good news is that this is something you can develop within yourself. You can work on this and you can build it up and you can make yourself stronger in this way. One of the benefits of being Star Trek fans is that we have a colossal body of work, the Star Trek canon, that we can look to for examples and for inspiration when it comes to all kinds of things. And courage is no exception to this rule. In fact, there are many, many examples of the characters that we love and enjoy embarking on things that require a great deal of courage. Just off the top of my head, let's look at Spock's sacrifice in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. The ship is in danger. There is a pending warp core breach. Somebody has to go into the warp core and lock it down, or else everybody dies. The only person on board who could survive long enough to execute that operation is Spock. His Vulcan physiology will allow him to survive for seconds longer than any human would in that situation, so it has to be him, and he knows it. He sets aside his fear, any discomfort he may have about that situation. Even though he's Vulcan, we know that Vulcans do have emotions. They just set them aside, and he is able to draw on his Vulcan logic to do so. Sets aside his fear of the negative consequences that might arise from that situation, dons those gloves, and locks himself into the warp core and saves everybody. Another example is Star Trek First Contact. This, for context, is years after Captain Picard has had an incredibly traumatic experience with the Borg, in which he was kidnapped by them, mutilated by them, had their devices implanted throughout his body, his mind ripped from him, and his thoughts and memories used against him and his friends to kill thousands of people in his name. Although he was able to get free from that situation and was able to resume his life as a starship captain, you can imagine that that trauma, even with 24th century psychiatric treatment, that never really leaves a person. But a few years later, in the events depicted in Star Trek First Contact, the Borg return. And it is Picard, even though he has been assigned to patrol the neutral zone during the Borg incursion, because Starfleet doesn't fully trust his reaction within that situation, Picard goes charging into that battle, phasers blazing, to take down the Borg himself. And he, in a story not unlike that of Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, pursues the Borg, personified by the Borg Queen, in an effort to put a stop to his former abuser. Now, he could, as Starfleet expected, he could have cowered in a corner, shivering and refusing to engage. He could have followed his orders and continued patrolling the neutral zone in case the Romulans decided to take advantage of the situation. But he knew that he was uniquely equipped and uniquely skilled to be able to take on the Borg threat, the battle of Sector 001. And so that was where he went. And then throughout the entire run of Star Trek Voyager, we have the various actions of Captain Janeway in the Delta Quadrant, heroically putting her life and sanity and health on the risk many times in an effort to help her crew survive and find their way back to the Alpha Quadrant. Too many to mention in this context. So these are moments that reflect moral or psychological or even physical bravery. When we're talking about Picard or Spock's choices in those moments, there's an aspect of all three of these different forms of courage, because there's physical harm that could come to them. There is moral harm that could come to them. They're facing a power far greater than themselves. And also there is, in the case of Picard and his actions, there is a previous history of trauma that he has to overcome in order to take those actions, make those choices, and save the people that need saving. Because Starfleet, the fictional Starfleet now, the core values are rooted in the principles of duty, service, and upholding these principles even when faced with adversity or discomfort. And those are the values that we, the real Starfleet, have inherited from that fictional Starfleet. Although we have two very different kinds of institutions, different kinds of organizations, we have those values in common. These values should be central to any decision-making process and should guide all actions and endeavors. The pursuit of comfort or personal gain should never supersede the responsibility to fulfill one's duty and to serve the greater good. So let's think a little bit more down to earth, to our own time and our own circumstance. What are the examples of using that kind of courage in our day-to-day life as real Starfleet officers? I would argue that courage is a requirement to be an active contributing member of the crew at many levels. So, I mean, the most obvious one that springs to mind is blood donation missions. So donating blood is uncomfortable. If you're not aware, blood donation missions are the single most important mission that the USS Dauntless embarks upon. Once every 9 weeks, we head out as a group, or typically as multiple different groups based in different cities. We go out in our respective groups together. We meet up and have a social meal together, and then we donate blood together. Every blood donation saves up to 3 lives, because 1 unit of blood given can be separated into 3 different products, and each product can be used to save a life. And the more of us that attend, the more friends and family we bring with us who donate, the more lives we can save. And non-donors are expected to join us as well, because an act of heroism like that is not without its anxiety or discomfort. And the more support we have with us, even if it's just keeping us company, helping us with transport, holding the camera and taking photographs, things like that, that kind of support makes the whole experience easier for everyone. So courage is required from all participants, not only the blood donors. This is a thing that we do, and it's our most important mission, which is why it's priority one. Priority one means that it is mandatory for all active duty personnel to participate and attend these missions. Now, donating blood, as I said, is not without discomfort. I mean, there are two moments during the process of the blood donation in which it's a little bit painful. The first one is when you get a little pinprick on your finger to test your iron level, to see if you have a high enough iron hemoglobin level, is that the right terminology, to safely donate blood. And that hurts. Like it goes right into the sensitive part of the tip of your finger, and it's quite sore. They take a little drop of blood, and they're able to test it from there. The second part is when you get to the actual bleeding part. So once the needle goes into your arm, it's quite sore for half a second. And then it's sort of a mild aching discomfort for a few minutes while the blood is draining out. And then it's a slightly painful pinch at the end when they pull the needle back out again. So assuming everything goes according to plan, it is inherently somewhat uncomfortable. The idea of somebody poking you with something sharp is not something that everybody enjoys thinking about. And experiencing it is also not necessarily fun. It's not mortal danger. It's not, nobody's coming at you with a sword or a machine gun or anything like that. Let's put everything in perspective. It's a small prick, but it is uncomfortable. It's a little bit painful, and nobody really likes it. It's not fun, that part of it. And there are small risks of secondary effects. It's not uncommon for somebody to feel a little bit lightheaded or even fainting after they've donated blood. This is as a result of your body's reaction to that sudden blood loss. It shifts your body's resources elsewhere to try and to cope for the sudden blood loss. Your body thinks basically that you've suffered a bad injury, and suddenly you've lost a lot of blood, and that can mean that response that that reaction that your body is taking can make you feel a little bit lightheaded or even lose consciousness. It's not a serious thing, but it can be quite uncomfortable and even embarrassing if you lose your balance and fall over in front of a group of people at the blood donation clinic. That's not fun. And you can even be a little bit weak and woozy for a day or two afterwards. That's also not unheard of. Especially when you're new to it. Your body kind of gets used to it after the first few donations, but those first couple can be quite a harrowing experience if you're not accustomed to it. So it's something that is uncomfortable. It can be a little bit scary, can be a little bit painful, but for the sake of others, for the people that are dying, people who need those blood units, or they will die if they do not receive them, we suffer that discomfort. We bite our lip and we get through it every single time because people need us to do that. It's a requirement. It's necessary. It's a moral obligation that we have. If you're capable of giving blood, you must do so. And that is something that we believe to be very, very important. So the courage that we're talking about here is something it's quiet. Even though we talk about heroes and we like to thank people for donating blood, we don't make a big fanfare out of it, not a very big fanfare. It's a personal courage that each of us has to wrestle with individually. And it's also one that, when executed, when deployed, is deeply impactful, especially to the people who need those blood units and their loved ones and families who now, as a result, do not have to mourn that person's passing. Donating blood, as I said, is a moral imperative. And if you can, you must. But it goes beyond, I mean, that's the most important thing that we do, but there are other contexts too where courage matters, being a Starfleet officer. Things as simple as speaking up in meetings, stepping into a duty station position. Duty station roles here on the Dauntless are essentially volunteer positions. I've done a number of videos on this topic, so you can look into that in more detail. But essentially, it's a position in which you sign up to, you commit to a certain set of deliverables that you are required to adhere to on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, daily, whatever, and you are committing to meet that set of deliverables on the regular. And it takes some courage to step up to that, because you're going to have to make some changes to your life. You're going to have to commit to doing these things, and you'll be held responsible for doing the things that you are committed to do. People are going to be relying on you, and you need to be able to handle the emotional and psychological pressure of being responsible for that aspect of the Dauntless running. Again, we're not talking about colossal world-ending responsibilities here, but it's non-trivial from an experiential point of view. It's not unlikely that you might feel a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of anxiety when contemplating whether or not to take on a volunteer position, and it requires a measure of courage to stand up and do that. Even if you're a standard duty, a standard position holder. So these are people who have not committed to a duty station set of deliverables, but just stepping up and helping out with projects or attending missions, especially if you have something like social anxiety. Getting out of your house and meeting people can be an awkward and uncomfortable thing at first. You'll get used to it, but taking that step, exercising that courage, recognizing your discomfort, recognizing your anxiety, and doing it anyway, that's the kind of courage that we're asking for you. And again, I'd like to emphasize, and we'll go into that now, courage is a muscle, and we can build it by using it. So let's talk about that. How does that work? What do I mean by that? So, as with all of these kinds of things reside in the brain. So there are three main brain areas that are relevant when we're talking about courage. And the first is the amygdala. The amygdala is a very old part of the brain. It dates back to our sort of fish ancestors, I suppose you could call them. And it is a part of the brain that is responsible for processing fear. So it's found in the temporal lobe, which is kind of there, and it's vital for processing emotions in general and fear in particular. It's part of the limbic system, and it quickly assesses sensory information for threats, and it triggers physiological responses like increased heart rate or the fight or flight response. So this is a part of the brain that reacts to your incoming sensory stimuli before you can think it through. So you see something and you're scared of it before you've even registered what that thing is. And that's necessary when we're talking survival situations. If you think back to our ancestors living on the savannah, you need to be able to assess and respond appropriately to the sighting of something like a lion or a leopard before you've had a time to think through whether or not it's a good idea to run away. You should already be running by the time you have that thought. And that's what the amygdala is for. It's to process that kind of information. So it's a very quick and very powerful and very effective part of the brain for processing emotional responses. And it forms and stores emotional memories. So it helps us to remember and avoid dangerous situations. So once you've responded with that kind of a response to a situation in the past, then it will help you respond even more quickly to similar situations in the future. So the amygdala, although it's the part of the brain that processes fear, it's a very important aspect of the way courage lives in the brain, and we'll work on that next. So next is a brain area that we've talked about a few times recently on these videos, and that is the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC. And this is a part of the brain that mediates the conflict between fear and decision making. So you've got the older, less sophisticated part of the brain, the amygdala, and then you've got your higher reasoning parts of the brain that are a bit slower. And the ACC is the part of the brain that sort of takes information from both portions and then figures out what the correct way of dealing with things is. It's crucial in managing cognitive dissonance and in decision making. And it mediates between your emotional centers, principally the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex, which we'll get onto next. The ACC is what evaluates risk. It signals conflict. So if you're getting conflicting bits of information, the ACC is going to pick that up. And what that typically means is that's where the double take comes from. You look at something, you process the information that you've seen, but now you've sensed that there's a conflict between what your amygdala is telling you and what your prefrontal cortex is telling you. So the ACC is going to signal you to look again. That second look, that's coming from the ACC. So the double take is an ACC. You need more information to make a more informed decision. So that happens when you've got conflicting drives coming from two different parts of the brain. And it triggers cognitive processes like attentional focus, concentrating on things. Emotional regulation. So this is the part of the brain that lets you live by the philosophy of the Stoics. It allows you to recognize your emotional state and set that aside when necessary. Because again, it's resolving that conflict between your emotional responses and your intellectual responses. It also helps you to resource cognitive to access cognitive resources. So I need to think about this kind of thing, and that kind of thinking happens over here. Pull that in. That kind of thinking happens over there. I need spatial reasoning. I need emotional reasoning. It's recruiting all the different parts of your brain in order to process the situation at hand. And the ACC also helps to detect errors. So errors and conflicts are kind of what it's dealing with. So when you have two different drives, one thing you know is important, and another thing is feeding back, oh, but that's difficult, it's uncomfortable. It's generating an error, and the ACC is helping to mitigate and process those errors. When the ACC is not working, when it's dysfunctional, that's when you have psychiatric disorders like chronic anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, or even depression, because your ACC is either overactive or underactive. It's not processing those conflicts correctly, or those errors correctly. And then that brings me to the third brain area, which is the prefrontal cortex. And this is the executive center that allows you to override your impulses. So it's the brain's executive center. It governs your higher order cognitive functions like planning, decision making, and impulse control. It also regulates your emotions, enabling your thoughtful choices over instinctive responses, which is vital for social interaction. So the ACC acts as the intermediary between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. It gets a signal from the amygdala saying, oh, scary, run away. And the prefrontal cortex says, no, this is a cool situation. We should be looking more into this. The ACC is going to go, okay, let's balance these two things against each other and decide what our course of action is going to be. Okay, we're going to stay and investigate this further. But those signals are then coming from the prefrontal cortex, which is doing that more advanced but slower processing that feeds back to the ACC. Additionally, it's crucial for working memory. So when you're working on a project, you're working on a task at the moment, you need to have all the relevant facts and information close to hand so that you're not digging into your long-term memory every time you need to recall a fact. And that sits there. It's kind of like the RAM of your brain, if you know anything about computer architecture. It's not directly analogous, but it's not dissimilar. So it's used in tasks like problem solving, your goal-directed behavior. And when this area of the brain is damaged or dysfunctional, it can lead to things like impulsivity, poor judgment, and your social abilities tend to decline. So courageous action, courage, the neurology of courage means that you've got suppression of the amygdala's fear signals by the ACC processing higher order ideas from the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex says, no, we don't need to worry about that. It's okay. The anterior cingulate cortex takes that information and is like, oh, okay, we don't have to worry about things. Typical example, walking through the zoo. You glance over there, you see, again, a tiger. Now, your body responds to a tiger. It knows what a tiger is. It knows that that's a dangerous thing. But your prefrontal cortex is aware that that's a tiger, and it comes back and says, no, wait, that tiger is in an enclosure. It's behind a wall. It's many meters away. It's sleeping. It's happy and comfortable. It's actually no threat to us right now. We can relax and just enjoy this. The anterior cingulate cortex is taking information from both parts of the brain, prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and sorting those two information sources out. And it's like, oh, yes, okay, we actually don't need to worry about this. But let's set aside that panic. Amygdala can calm down now. So it's not just, courage isn't just about willpower. It's not some magical ability that you can have and you can summon up. This is just your brain working as it's supposed to. But again, you can, through understanding how the processes of courage works, this is something that you can enhance and build up and strengthen over time. So how do you do that? How do you strengthen your courage? How do you get more courage? So this is a great turn of phrase that I discovered in my research about this, and that's called microdosing discomfort. Microdosing is something of a fad in drug use, where you take a very small amount of a drug, and that's supposed to give you a very small amount of a high. It's nonsense. When we're talking about drugs, it doesn't work that way. But when we're talking about discomfort, when it comes to building up resilience and courage, this is an approach that might actually work. So what does that look like? if you in your day-to-day life seek out small, controlled challenges regularly, and you embrace the mindset of continuous growth by actively seeking out and engaging in small, manageable challenges on a regular basis, these challenges should ideally push you slightly outside your comfort zone while remaining within the realm of control and attainability. For example, if you're uncomfortable with public speaking, you should volunteer to present a brief topic at the next team meeting. Or if you want to get in better shape, start by committing to a short walk each day and gradually increase the distance. This is something that I've talked about in our mission readiness videos extensively, is that the more you push yourself to do uncomfortable things, the easier it becomes to do the uncomfortable things. So if you want to get in shape, which if you're a Starfleet officer, I hope you do want to, start with the easiest, most attainable version of that. So going for a walk is a perfectly good way to start. If you're doing nothing, going for a walk is something. Rather do something than nothing. And if you can push yourself, motivate yourself, and cajole yourself, trick yourself into doing that every day, that's definitely progress. That's a step in the right direction. And you'll find that before too long, you're getting less and less of a cognitive load making that decision to do that each time. Eventually, it's just something that you do. It's part of your day. You don't have to decide to do it. It's just happening. That's when you know that your interior singular cortex is getting a little stronger, and that's when it's time to take on the next challenge. Maybe the next challenge is parkrun on a Saturday. Pushing yourself a little bit further. Maybe it's doing some squats. Maybe it's joining the gym, that kind of thing. So pushing yourself into something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable all the time, in the parlance of our times, stepping outside of your comfort zone is a thing that is useful. You don't have to step far. You don't have to leap all the way out of your comfort zone and do something that's completely unsupportable or something that you can't possibly sustain. But just a small step that you can get yourself used to, and then step a little further and step a little further. That's the kind of thing that's useful. Public speaking is also a great example. In fact, if you are residing in Tau sector, which is the Greater Cape Town area, I would strongly encourage you to come and volunteer at Cheetah Outreach, even if it's 1 or 2 days a month. It has to be 4 days a month. That's the minimum. So once on a weekend, Saturday or Sunday. One thing that volunteering at Cheetah Outreach will help you do is master your fear of public speaking, because the very first thing you're going to be asked to do on your first day, okay, not the very first thing, but like the third thing you'll be asked to do on your very first day is start talking to guests and performing public speaking on a small, confined scope. So you'll be talking to small groups of guests, giving them what we call the briefing, which is the safety briefing, advising them on what they need to expect and what they need to do when they go into the cheetah encounters, how to behave, how to act, how to stand, how to kneel, how to stroke, how to move. And you're just doing a dozen of these little presentations to relatively small groups of people every day. Before you know it, it's not even uncomfortable anymore. And then once you've mastered the safety briefing, we'll then upgrade you to tours. And with tours, you're talking much longer. You're doing a 30-minute presentation to larger groups of people, groups up to 20 or 30 people at a time. And again, it's a little nerve-wracking at first, but once you get the hang of it, you won't think twice about it. It's great exposure to public speaking. And there are also institutions where you can do this in a more sort of structured way. Toastmasters has been around for a long time. I know Master Chief Kotza is involved with, I don't think it's Toastmasters, but it's something like Toastmasters. There are various places that you can go to help to master that skill. And it's not just the skill of doing the public speaking itself, it's also the skill of being courageous enough to do it. So lots of good places that you can go to push yourself out of your comfort zone and do things that are a little bit uncomfortable. So by consistently tackling these controlled challenges, you can steadily build your resilience, you can expand your skill set, and you can foster a greater sense of self-efficacy. That's an important aspect, actually, of courage. And I think that that's something we haven't really touched on before now, is that if you can exercise courage in a situation and you can recognize the fact that you've done that, that gives you quite a strong sense of accomplishment, especially if it's something that you knew you weren't capable of doing before. The first time you're able to muster your fear and donate blood despite that fear, that feeling is pretty awesome. And 10 out of 10 can recommend. There are also cognitive strategies. Sorry, before we continue, let me take a sip of my beverage. Beg your pardon. All right, so cognitive strategies, things you can do just within the confines of your own head. So visualization is something that a lot of people use. What does that mean? So you create a mental image of successfully navigating the challenge that you're facing or reaching the desired outcome. So you can vividly picture yourself overcoming obstacles and achieving goals, which can then help to boost your confidence and motivation. And why does this help? Here we can draw on Star Trek as well. So episodes, Next Generation, it was about season 4 or 5. I think it was called the Booby Trap. There was a situation where the Enterprise was trapped in an asteroid field by a bunch of asteroids that it had inside them hidden mines. Those mines were sucking all the energy out of the Enterprise, and they needed to try and fly out of this minefield. It took them a long time to figure out the technicalities of it. But the whole time while they were trying to figure out how to get out of this minefield, they were running simulations. So set up a particular set of parameters and then run a simulation on the computer, run a simulation on the computer, run a simulation on the computer. What the simulation is telling you is it's helping you do that thing in an environment where you're not actually hurting anybody. You're testing it out. You're trying it out in a practice environment. And one of the cool things about the human brain is that we are very well equipped to do that kind of simulation right here. We don't really need a computer to do that. It's nice to have a cool computer to run simulations on, but it's not strictly required. If you are faced with a situation and you are not sure if you have the mental or physical or emotional fortitude to do the thing, if you can take a few minutes to just think it through, just imagine what it would look like to actually do the thing that you're being asked to do. Try to think about it in as much detail as you possibly can. Think about every physical step that you might need to take. Think about what you'd have to do mentally in order to accomplish it, and then picture what it would look like if it was done. Just having run that simulation can give you enough emotional and cognitive feedback and background information to help you get through that difficult situation. Visualization is surprisingly effective. And in fact, a lot of us are doing this all the time without even realizing it. In fact, probably most of us are doing this all the time without even realizing it. But if you can do it at an intentional level, that's not a bad thing. Another cognitive step we can do is we can reframe fear as excitement. That sounds a bit weird. What do I mean by that? So you can consciously shift your emotional perspective on fear, so that whenever you experience fear, instead of allowing it to cripple you with anxiety, you can reframe it as something that is exciting or anticipation, something that you can something to look forward to. This is how people are able to jump out of airplanes for the first time, because they don't allow their fear of doing so to be a debilitating emotional state. They reframe it as anticipation or excitement. That helps to channel that emotional, nervous energy. It's not literal energy, but it feels like energy, into a positive momentum towards doing the thing that you need to do. Jumping out of airplanes notwithstanding. Another thing you can try perhaps is something like affirmations. So these are positive statements that help you to reinforce your desired beliefs and outcomes. So by repeatedly affirming your capabilities and your potential, the things that you're actually capable of doing, you can cultivate a more optimistic and empowered mindset. Now that sounds a little bit airy-fairy, and fair enough, maybe it is. But what this can help you to do is it can help to build the neural connections in your brain that guide you towards a certain set of outcomes. So if you have a particular set of outcomes in mind, if you're thinking about what those outcomes should be or could be or would be, if you are able to move towards them, the more affirmations, the more times you can reaffirm within yourself that this is where I want to be, the more likely you are able to make the correct decision when the situation arises that allows you to choose between two different outcomes, an undesirable one and a desirable one. That can help to mitigate your fear ahead of time and allow you to act courageously despite what might otherwise be an anxious situation. And these techniques can be used individually or in combination to enhance your performance and to manage your anxiety. So these are all things you can do inside your head starting today that can help to mitigate anxiety and therefore to increase resilience and build courage. And then there is the old thing, the next thing you can do, which I talk about all the time, and I'm going to talk about it again now, and that is physical exercise. Physical exercise is unmatched when it comes to building all kinds of things, including courage. So how does that work? So firstly, it boosts neuroplasticity. Oh, to be clear, we're not talking about physical exercise. I'm talking about all kinds of physical exercise here, whether that's cardiovascular, strength building, functional training. I strongly recommend you do all of those, but any one of those will do as long as you're doing some of it often, more days than not, and you're pushing yourself so that you're getting your heart rate a little bit up. What that does is it helps to boost your neuroplasticity and your brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. What is neuroplasticity? So this is a thing that happens in the brain, and it was only relatively recently discovered that this even happened in adult humans, which is that your brain is able to generate new nerve cells and is able to restructure itself based on your experiences. Neuroplasticity. The plastic as in it's able to change itself, and neuro as in your neurons. So it's able to rewire itself physically based on your experiences, neuroplasticity. So what this does is it supports learning because you're restructuring your brain to accommodate new information, and mental resilience. This mechanism likely involves the interplay between neuroplasticity and BDNF. BDNF, yes. And BDNF, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a chemical in the brain, is a key protein that promotes the process of neuroplasticity by supporting the growth, the survival, and differentiation of neurons. So the brain's ability to rewire itself happens as a result of this BDNF's presence. So it's a protein that goes in there, and that's what the neurons rebuild themselves out of, essentially. So by boosting both your neuroplasticity and BDNF levels, both of which are enhanced through physical exercise, the brain becomes more adaptable and capable of learning new information, of storing memories, of thinking creatively. And this enhanced cognitive flexibility also allows for better stress management and overall mental well-being. So when we're talking about learning new information and storing memories, this is exactly the kind of thing that helps to build courage, helps to build resilience. You're programming your brain to be more brave, to be less anxious, to be less fearful. There's also the other effect, and this is something we've spoken about a lot, is that irregular exercise helps to boost correction, helps to regulate cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone, and it builds stress tolerance. So when you are in stress, so this is when your amygdala has determined that there is a situation where you should be stressful about it, cortisol is released into your system, and cortisol triggers all kinds of other effects. But having too much cortisol in your body all the time leads to bad things. It's a fairly corrosive chemical. So you want to be regulating your cortisol levels so that you have enough of it when you need it, and you don't have too much of it when it's not necessary. And regular physical exercise, again, any of those three kinds, but preferably all three, has been shown over and over again, many studies, to have a significant impact on your stress levels. It helps to regulate your body's production of cortisol. So you're producing cortisol at an appropriate level, not too much or too little. And it also helps to manage the cortisol levels, like the reabsorption of cortisol after it's been put into the system. So when it's no longer used, it gets reuptaken. Is that past tense? That doesn't sound right. It gets reabsorbed. So exercise can increase your resilience to stress by enabling you to cope better with challenging situations through that cortisol regulation. Additionally, exercise promotes the release of endorphins, the feel-good hormones, which are natural mood elevators and can further combat feelings of stress and anxiety. So endorphins are like a chemical reward system that happens inside your brain. When you do something cool, you release endorphins, and that improves your mood. So it helps you to manage stress, both by regulating your cortisol levels and by producing endorphins. And that happens from all kinds of exercise. Granted, you're less likely to experience an endorphin rush when you first start exercise because it just kind of feels cuck all the time. But once you achieve a certain level of basic fitness, then you will start to feel that endorphin rush as you're doing it, what they call the runner's high. Engaging in that physical activity will produce high levels of endorphins, and it'll make you feel better afterwards. Yes, tired, yes, sore, but also somewhat euphoric. And that helps again to regulate your stress. Activities like martial arts, which is sort of, again, a focused form of physical exercise. Cold exposure. There's a lot of interesting research coming in about cold exposure, but maybe we'll cover that on another video. And endurance sports. So that's long distance running or rowing or cycling. These mimic stress and help to rewire fear responses. So what you're doing is you're kind of simulating stressful environments by putting yourself into these difficult physical situations. Cold exposure is one of them, taking an ice bath. And that helps you to, again, with that neuroplasticity, you rewire your brain's ability to cope with those stressful situations. Activities that simulate stress, like the martial arts, I would just say that. So by repeatedly and safely confronting simulated stresses, individuals can desensitize themselves to fear. So fear and stress are kind of the same thing, and develop healthier coping mechanisms, leading to reduced fear and anxiety, improved stress management, and enhanced overall well-being. So exercise, very important to maintaining your ability to regulate your emotions, especially fear, which results in courage. You can make yourself braver by hitting the gym, not only through the act of building your ACC, forcing yourself to do things that are uncomfortable, but also the physical results of exercise will also help you to manage your fear and stress after the fact. So, in conclusion, courage isn't solely the domain of people facing immediate physical peril. If you're standing on the side of a building, or in a car accident or something like that, or battlefield, or on the bridge of a starship, it's a quality that's demanded of each of us in the here and now as we make decisions and face the challenges of our daily lives. Whether it's standing up for what's right, whether it's speaking out against injustice, or simply persevering through difficult times, courage is a virtue that we all need to cultivate. It's not always easy. In fact, it's definitively difficult most of the time, and requires putting ourselves in difficult situation, stepping out of our comfort zones, but it's always worth it in the end. So I'm going to issue a challenge to the crew. This is not a formal challenge like the fitness challenge or the linguistics challenge. This is just a personal challenge that I invite you all to join me in. This week, I encourage you to actively seek out a chance to make a courageous decision, even if it seems something small and insignificant. And I'm not talking about blood donations this time. We don't have one scheduled this week. This is in your day-to-day life. Step outside your comfort zone, even if it's in a small way. Foster your personal growth and resilience. This could involve speaking up for what you believe in, facing a fear, admitting a mistake, offering help to someone who needs it, or just trying something new. Remember that courage isn't about the absence of fear, it's about acting despite it. By making a conscious effort to choose courage this week, we can cultivate a stronger, more confident, and more compassionate community. All right, let's look at what's happening in the chat. There's been a lot of activity. Has anything been directed at me? No. Oh, wait, no, there's one. There we go. Captain Van Kernen says, on a side note, the blood donation missions are like a wholesome pyramid scheme. 1 is greater than 2, is greater than 4, is greater than 8. Sure. Yeah. Okay. I'll take that. Okay, cool. All right. Nothing else I need to address there. So I'm going to conclude with a quote from Star Trek, one of my favorites, and it relates to this one. So this is from the episode The Cage. The original pilot episode was also replayed in the original series episode The Menagerie, and it's from the lips of Dr. Boyce, the Chief Medical Officer of the USS Enterprise. And he says, "A man either lives life as it happens to him, meets it head on and licks it, or he turns his back on it and starts to wither away." Love it. All right. Thank you. That is all for today. You are dismissed. Swart out.